On this show, we break down real estate, looking behind the lens at investors, how they built their portfolio, how they scaled, what tactics they used to get there. I'm your host, Ryan Richards, loan officer and investor. And today I brought on an awesome guest in Tony Eisenhower, who is a real estate investor and entrepreneur, focuses a lot on fix and flips and Subto and creative finance. So today we dove through Tony's journey from single family flip all the way up to now managing 3 flips at the same time with a portfolio of 8 rental units, and he's set the stage to grow further. We dive through seller finance, how he financed these deals, things to be aware of when seller financing, how does it work, what do sellers have for oppositions, how do you overcome it, if you're looking to get into seller financing, Subto, creative financing, where to turn to, and there's lots more in here. So stay tuned and hope you enjoy. Tony, thank you for joining me here today. I'm excited to dive into more about you and your story and really examine some Subto deals, talk about what Subto is, seller finance, and I know that'll be valuable to listeners, and I'm sure I'll learn something too. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I'm pumped to be here.
If you wouldn't mind, start by telling listeners a little bit about yourself. How'd you get into real estate? What was your background? And then kind of where you find yourself today in real estate and whatever else you want to share.
Yeah, cool. So my name's Tony Eisenhower from Worcester County. I do fix and flips. I have some long-term rentals. I'm actually diving into the short-term rentals this year as well. So pretty versed in the real estate space. I have a wife, 2 kids, 5 and 3. So kids are interesting. Kids are fun.
As if you needed more to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm busy with that stuff as well. But I got 8 long-term rental doors at this point, and I have 3 active flips going in Worcester County. So
for you, that's a lot to manage.
Yeah, it's quite a bit, and we're diving into some short-term rentals this year as well, trying to build that monthly cash flow up and keep the long-terms going too. So
very good. Now, are these deals you've acquired over a long period of time, or are these deals you've more recently ramped up on as far as some of the long-term acquisitions? And if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about, kind of that first deal and what it was like. A lot of the listeners on the podcast are people trying to get that first deal or go from one to make the leap from that first one to how do I get 2, 3, 4 more? So
definitely.
Curious to hear kind of that first deal story, which I think we've talked a little bit about before.
Yeah, we have. 2019, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur probably my whole life. Since I was 16, my parents always said, I always wanted to be my own boss. Never really liked strict rules and strict job type stuff, I guess. So I've always been an entrepreneur at heart. I've had probably, 7 businesses now. A few failed attempts, but I've learned more failing than I have necessarily with success, So
Absolutely.
My last business was a transportation business before I dove into real estate. And I drove truck for 12 hours a day. So it was a dump truck. We transported out aggregate. So, rock and stone and mulch, stuff like that. So I was in the seat for 12 hours a day, and all I did was listen to podcasts. So real estate podcasts, personal development, stuff like that. So I got a ton of seat time and just straight up listening to this stuff.
Caught the bug.
Yeah. And it was man, I'm sitting in this truck 12 hours a day making average wage here. It's I want to dive into real estate, especially listening to Pace and all that creative stuff that he does with low to no money down. And I was man, I can get into this. And at that point I was working 12 hours a day. And then after I got back with the trucks, I'd have to work on the trucks. I'd have to do brakes and tires. And I was man, I was just getting burnt out doing that. So I ended up selling the trucks 2019. And with that money, I bought my first single family house. And that was actually a burr now. So
was that the intent going into it, or was that you saw it as an opportunity just to have a new place to live? Or were you thinking I'm going to go into this and renovate it and pull out some money?
It was so it's actually a unique story. My house, it's 2 houses. It's 2 separate parcels of land. But the house we were renting was in the back. It was a bigger house. And then there was a house out front that was just completely needed to be torn down, basically. So I told my landlord, I was hey, I want to buy the house if you're willing to sell it. And he's I'm not really ready to sell right now. I'd rather just keep, he was making good money off me.
Sure, yeah.
So I rented for 2 or 3 years, and I just kept telling him dude, I want to buy it. And eventually he sold us that back house that we were renting. And I said, well, I want to buy the front house too. He owned both. So he's like, all right, well, the front house has to be a cash deal because it needed a septic, needed roof, siding, windows, like the whole nine. So I was like, I had money saved at that point from the selling the trucks and stuff. So I was like, yeah, I'm down. Like, let's do it. So I paid $90,000 for that house, put about 100 into it, windows, siding, roof, flooring, kitchen, like everything.
And you manage that yourself?
Yeah, that was my first project. Like I said, I've had a few businesses, so like I was familiar with most of the trades. So I did a lot of it myself. There was a big chimney I actually tore down all by myself. Like, I got videos and pictures of that. That was pretty cool.
That's not something I would fare well with. But
yeah, it was quite the project. My wife's like, you're absolutely crazy. But got it done. And it's actually a rental now for us. I still have it. Cleared all the land around the house, and it's actually beautiful now. So
nice. And that's, I mean, looking at that from the outside shoe, like to be able to take on your own flip, obviously you have to have the experience, but I think something we talk about a lot in real estate is like seeing the long-term vision.
Yeah.
You know, because most people tell you, oh, you're crazy. Don't do that.
Right.
You're not going to make any money. Or, it's going to take you forever to make a profit. But it's like,
right.
You look at the long-term vision. You're not looking at the house saying, oh, it's ugly. It needs roof, windows, and septic. You're like, I can sell this thing for X. It's
right.
What does it cost me to fix? And I think that's where like a lot of people run into challenges is rather than look at the obstacle, like look past the obstacle, what's the best possible outcome,
right,
and then backtrack from there.
Right.
So I'm sure you've, especially the course of having multiple businesses, you've had to become a problem solver, which I'm sure is transferred into real estate.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I love the saying, like, your net worth is as big as the problems that you solve, so the bigger problems that you have and the bigger problems that you can solve is just money in the bank,
Absolutely.
So if you look at problems and you just come up with excuses for them, you're going to stay where you are. You're never going to grow. So
yeah, and at that point, was that a revelation to you in the sense of, well, I'm going to do more flips? So do you transition right from there into flipping with, some extra cash you pulled from the house, or what was your next move from that point?
Yeah. So like I said, I put about 100 into it. So I had all my cash tied up in there at that time, which was like 180 grand, which is a decent amount of cash.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I actually took out a HELOC on it. At the time, I think that was 2020. We took out like 115,000 out, which I had used for other failed businesses and stuff like that. But I was able to pay that back with flips and stuff. So it ended up working out. But I'm actually doing a cash out refi on it right now, and I'm taking out like 250,000 out of it. So the ARV, I just had it appraised. It appraised at 450.
Wow.
So I bought it for 90, put 100 into it, and it appraised at 450. So like you said, it's more of like, what if it goes wrong? And what if it goes right?
Right.
And this was that case. So
and that's, I think, again, people, they get short-sighted. So you have to look at what is the best possible outcome. What if it goes right? And then how do I make sure it gets there? And you just quantify your risks. And
right.
It's most of life anyway.
Right.
But especially going through that, even if it failed, you would have learned so much about the process.
So much.
Remember when I bought my first 5-family, looking back, I was someone similar to you where I've had a lot of like book knowledge. I listened to a ton of podcasts, read, the Bigger Pockets forum was probably my home screen, for a while.
Legit.
And I fell into it.
Yeah.
But as much as you can do your homework, there's so many things that you just don't know until you're in it.
Take action.
You take action. Like, you don't know that you could go through a million examples, but just something as simple as dealing with a gas installation. You're putting a new gas line in just to install a washer dryer. Well, all the steps that go with that, but you're not going to know the little details, how to manage tenants and how to deal with evictions and problems until you just do.
Right.
So I think there's a huge value in that. And I'm curious from that point to now, right? So you had those two properties renovated, put some good equity in, held for rental. You just pulled out to this point.
Yep.
So as far as the flips now, are you still managing those yourself, or do you have a team? You're still doing?
Yes. So I subcontract everything out. I just kind of GC the jobs. I'm not a licensed GC, but I just kind of oversee the jobs myself. So luckily I have a lot of good subcontractors, and I know a lot of GCs who pull permits for me and stuff like that. So I'm able to just kind of oversee, which is really like the best way for you to make a good return on a flip is to utilize other people, subcontractors, GCs. And if I was doing all of that work myself, let's say, I would not be able to do 3 or 4 flips at a time. So my first flip I did, like I said, it wasn't technically a flip. I kept it. But that first renovation, I did all that work myself and quickly realized, man, if I want to scale or if I want to do a couple of these, I can't be doing this myself. It took me 8 months,
right?
With
carrying costs, especially different types of financing and leverage,
right,
it matters, how long it takes to do projects.
Definitely. So. And like that one was cash. So obviously there was no holding costs on that other than, utilities and stuff. But it was a good learning experience. I wouldn't change it for the world because I learned so much doing it and learned that that's not where I need to be and not my best use of time,
I think that's a really important point that you hear a lot of people talk about, but stick to the tasks that you're best at because the other ones you can offload to someone who's better than you.
Right.
And it's hard to realize maybe I'm not the best fit for this, or I think the better way to look at it is I could go make more money or be valuable somewhere else.
Right.
I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs' pain point is they just need to give something up, but they don't know what.
Right.
And they know they can do it, so they do it anyway. And that's a hard bridge to cross. But once you get there, now you can manage more volume.
Definitely. Yeah. Like even, kitchens and baths and stuff in flips, it's like, yes, I can mount those cabinets and yes, I can install the vanities and do all this stuff. And I'd probably save $12,000-$15,000. But if I can go out and get another contract and make $50,000 to $100,000, like what's my highest and best use of time there? Saving the $5,000 or $12,000, whatever it is, or making that $50,000 to $100,000 on another deal.
And from that point in 2019, when you started that project to now, what's been the biggest shift in your business? Has it been the ability to now disperse and delegate that's gotten you there? And have you utilized any different types of financing to keep cash in pocket? Because I know, obviously, I follow you on social media. I know a lot about what you talk about and definitely want to dive into that too. But for listeners, a lot of people's biggest barrier into not only getting into real estate, but scaling is cash.
Definitely.
Everyone runs out of cash. I don't care who you are, unless you're maybe Grant Cardone. But other than that, you run out of cash or use other people's money. So what has been your strategy to managing the cash side of things? Have you looked at any creative finance? And if so, we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah. So that first deal I did was cash. Like I said, that tied up all of my savings, all of my money. So me and my wife were super stressed at that point. We had one boy at that time. So it was like, we're going all in on this. And luckily it worked out. But I quickly realized that I needed other people's money or more money or banks, whatever, to continue to do this because I can't keep just using all of my money. So our first flip, that was an actual flip. After that, we used hard money, which I'm glad I did now because, again, I learned a lot from it. It's expensive and it's kind of tedious. You have to send project reports as you go. As the project goes on, they either come and inspect or you take pictures in an app and let them know how the project's going. And you basically get draws from that bank. So it's great. It's a good way to utilize if you're just getting into your first fix and flip, let's say. It's a good way to get money quick. They go off of like the project most of the time. So it's not necessarily like how good your credit is or how good you look on paper. It's more about the deal. So if you have a good deal and you can prove that you can do the project, you can get hard money that way. And then there's also private money, which private money is what I use now, which is just regular people like us with, a couple 100,000, million, whatever in the bank. And instead of putting that money into the stock market or other avenues for them to make money, they invest with me and I give them a return. Right.
That's great to hear the breakdown too, because that's often two terms that get mixed together. But for listeners, it's hard money versus private money. As Tony mentioned, private money is more individualistic. It's Tony coming to me, hey Ryan, I need to borrow some money, and we come to a set of terms. So generally you can move those along faster and they can be more favorable. But there's a significant amount of trust needed to get access to the resources.
Absolutely.
And you typically need a pretty good track record to be able to get some private money financing. Whereas hard money, that's private institutions. Right. So they're playing with a larger pool of money. They're able to give people money very quickly, typically pretty high leverage for some of the projects they're considering.
Right.
And with fairly minimal documentation and experience, but you can imagine as easier things get without experience, it typically becomes more expensive. So
definitely.
That's what you get with hard money is higher rates. But for a lot of people and most people, it's a great vehicle to get that first 1, 2, 3 under your belt.
Absolutely.
And hopefully pivot to something more affordable. So.
Yeah. And then with hard money, like I tell everybody, it's like, even if it is expensive, if you run your numbers correctly and you're still making money, what does it matter? You know what I mean?
Right. I was joking the other day because my brother's in private commercial financing. They're doing large scale developments, but he said the other day they underwrote someone at 17% interest. And the other person in the room with us was like, oh my God. I'm like, yeah, but we didn't talk about what's the return.
Right.
If you said, give me money at 25% interest, I'd be like, you're crazy.
Right.
But then if you said, well, I'll give you 50% in return.
Right.
Risk reward. Now you just underwrite it in the deal,
Yep.
and the rate doesn't really matter. It's all about what's the end result. Am I
Exactly.
making money or not?
Exactly.
And it just eats at the chunk. So I think sometimes people get that mental block of, oh, that's too expensive.
Right.
The rate's too high.
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone would love a low rate.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, but factor it in the deal and move forward the best you can so you make the most possible with what you have to work with.
Right. Yeah, it goes for rentals too. I mean, like right now, yeah, the rates are high, but if you can pencil out a deal and it makes sense, you're cash flowing a couple $100, whatever it is, in 5 years from now when rates come down, it's gravy from there, And whereas you might have missed out on that deal because you didn't get it.
And both are relatively short term. If you
Right.
went hard money on a flip and ended up buying it out yourself with some other financing, now you're at long-term financing. So
Right.
you get rid of the high rates. Same with rentals. You can
Yep.
always, I was saying this earlier, you can always get tomorrow's rate.
Right.
But you can't get today's price.
Nope.
So, you have to think about that as you're looking at things. And
Right.
I think sometimes people get roadblocks with that. And then with that, hard money, I think a lot of times people don't know where to go, which is
Yeah.
important because you have to have a trusted, hard money source. So
Definitely.
that's a key part of the relationship. It goes both ways.
It does. Yeah. There's some good ones out there too. I have no problem. Anybody can reach out. I can share some information there. I'm sure you know plenty as well.
Sure.
But yeah, the other thing with hard money is points. Usually they'll charge you points. So like if you're paying $200,000 for a house, they're going to charge you 2 or 3 points. So that would be like $2,000, $4,000, $6,000, depending on how many points it is.
Which is another cost to consider too. And
plus the high interest. So
that's where it adds up for people who don't know the right questions to ask, or
right.
Some people don't know what a point is.
Right.
It's a percent of the loan. So
right.
if they say, oh, I'm borrowing $500,000, you say that's a point. That's way different than if you say I'm borrowing $200,000, that's 2 points.
Right.
In your head, you're like, oh, it's 1 versus 2, but they can be way
different.
drastically different.
Absolutely.
Depending on what the deal is. So
yeah. So private money, if you can link up with somebody and you can create your own terms, right? Like you could do 8%, you could do 20%, no points, 20 points, like whatever you want, So
it's just negotiation between you and ultimately person, or essentially the bank, if you will.
Right.
It's just a person acting as a bank, which I think private financing gets mixed in with hard money, and then we have this other seller financing piece that gets mixed in, which I'd love to talk more with you about and get your experience with, because seller financing it's almost like a form of private financing, right?
Yeah,
it is.
it is. Yeah.
It's still an individual, but it's for their, typically for their property or some benefit. So
right.
Talk about one, kind of what you see seller financing as and how you've seen it used, and what's been your experience with seller financing.
Yeah. So actually I bought a deal in Connecticut, Dayville, Connecticut. It's 2 duplexes in a commercial garage that was on seller finance. So seller finance, just to let everybody know who may not know, seller finance is, the difference between seller finance and subject to. Seller finance is the person who owns the building would own it outright, so they have no mortgage on it. Subject to would be that they have a mortgage on it and you're going to take over their payments. There's also other things like hybrid deal. So a hybrid would be like you're going to take over their subject to mortgage, and then there's going to be a second position where they're going to seller finance you the equity. So like let's say you're buying a rental that is $500,000. They owe $200 on it, but your sale price is $500. So you have $300,000 of equity there. They're going to take that $300 and seller finance you at whatever rate you agree on. So 0 to 10%, whatever it is. And then you create your terms on that second note. So that would be like a hybrid deal.
Right. And there's multiples beyond that too.
Yes.
With seller finance, but
yeah, there's wraps, there's all sorts of cool stuff.
And what's the benefit for a buyer? If you have a property and I can go to the bank and get financing, why would I want to go to you, Tony Eisenhower, to buy your property with you being the bank and paying you payments? What's the benefit for the buyer?
So seller finance, typically, like we're willing to pay more for the property if we get terms. So what terms means is basically like if I can go to the bank and get 8%, I have to put 20% down on it. Now, if you could seller finance me at 5%, for a 30-year amortized, it may or may not have a balloon as well. But if you could do like 5% and 5% down or 10% down, that saves me from having to run my credit and get approved with the bank and do that down payment and that whole thing. So I'm willing to pay more for that property because you're giving me terms.
Right. The benefit over the long run too is they collect interest.
Yeah.
So a property that's $500,000 in value with a 7% rate is much different than just paying out right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that if you do the math on that, I don't know what it is, but it would be, instead of 500, it's like 750, 8, 9, whatever it is. So
it's multiples more.
Yeah. It's quite a bit more.
And now do you target, so you've done seller finance,
yeah.
right?
Yep.
Would you talk a little bit about, if you could, that deal? And then did you have the mindset of seller finance going in, or was it something that translated to as another option as the process went, or how did you seek that opportunity out, and what was the end result?
Yeah, so this property in particular is actually my wife's mother and stepfather. They had a sanitation business, which was the commercial garage out back, and then it had 2 duplexes out front, and they owned it outright. So it was kind of in the family for a long time. And they sold the business, and I said, hey, listen, when you guys sell the business, I want to buy the property. And they're like, okay, like what would that look like? And I presented seller finance to them because they just sold their business. So keep in mind, they just, multiple millions, whatever it was, they paid taxes on that money. So I'm like, listen, if you seller finance me this property, you're only going to get taxed on the monthly amount that I give you. So you're not going to get taxed on that big lump sum of $1 million, whatever it is, if you were to just sell it on the market. Not only are you saving money on taxes, you're not paying realtors. You don't have to do any upgrades on the property. I can take it as is. So there's a ton of benefit for them there. And they're obviously in retirement at this point. So they're just getting a check every month for the next 30 years.
Passive income,
like truly passive income. So,
and then for them, in obviously this particular situation, people often think, well, it's almost like you're renting in a sense, but you own the property. So yes. It's nice because for them, with the level, you build the level of trust, and it can be a great proposition because you get that steady income stream, and you get years and years of what will accumulate to be multiples of your first initial sale price. So.
Exactly. Yep. And a lot of people will say, well, why would I seller finance that? What if you just don't make the payments? So let's just say in 5 years, I stop making the payments on that property. Well, there's a performance deed that we sign that basically says after 30 days of us not paying, this property gets deeded back to you. So I just made payments for 5 years. And as you know, the market continues to grow typically. So, in 5 years, that's just going to be worth more money. I made payments on it for 5 years and I defaulted. Now you get that property back in typically better condition than you sold it to me. And you really didn't lose anything in that deal, So there is risk. I'm not going to say there isn't risk, and obviously anything can happen. We could trash the property but typically in most situations, it's like, I want to keep that property obviously kept up. It's mine, it's my property. The deed is in my name. I could technically sell it again. So.
Right. You want to make money off it. So
right.
That means making it nice.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And now have you continually sought out more seller financing opportunities? And
yeah,
what are you seeing as some of the main objections to seller finance from the seller's perspective? Because I know for a listener, if I was hearing all this great stuff, I'm like, well, I want to do that.
Right.
So how would you advise someone who's thinking of getting into it, and what are some of those objections or pitfalls you might want to have them know about?
Yeah, like I said, with seller finance, typically, or any creative deal, you're willing to pay more than the average person who's paying cash or using a bank. So, like, a lot of people are stuck on that number. Like, I want $1 million for this property, and that property might sit on the market for 200 days because the market's telling you, hey, it's not worth $1 million, it's worth 800, but they're willing to just wait and not sell it. So you could approach that person and say, hey, listen, I'll give you your number, but you have to offer me terms, like I said, which would be interest rate, down payment, all that stuff. So you can really focus on like either expired listings, which would be houses that were on the market that didn't sell. You could make that list and call all those people and say, hey, listen, I saw that your property didn't sell for that number. I'm willing to pay you that number if we're willing to work on terms. Expired listings is a good one. And then days on market, like properties that have been on the market for over 60, 90 days is a great place to start. Call those people, call the agents and say, hey, this isn't selling. Do you think that they'd give me terms if I give them their price?
And I think having that direction as far as like, where do I look? Because I think that's one of the more common, concerns or hesitancies I hear from people who are like, oh, seller finance is great, I want to do it, but I don't know where to find a deal. Like, how do I find someone who wants to give me money?
Right.
So I think that's points people in the right direction, and then gives them some ammo as far as like, why would someone want to take my offer? And you can't sell anyone anything if you don't believe what you're selling. So
Exactly.
you got to know the benefit to them. And I think for the right people, there's a huge benefit.
There is a huge benefit. And unfortunately, like a lot of agents aren't really savvy on creative finance. So you do have stuff that's on the market. You do have that barrier where you're talking to the agent. Typically, you're not talking directly to the seller. So you almost have to educate the agent sometimes on that as well and say, hey, like this is why it's going to benefit your seller. You know, we're not trying to take advantage here, but this is why X, Y, and Z. This is a better deal for your seller.
And do you foresee more opportunities coming up in seller finance, given that there's a large demographic that's had, you know, properties forever? You know, the generational turnover of landlords, I think there's I don't know the statistic, but a large majority of properties are held by older people. Do you think there'll be more of that coming out?
I definitely think so. I think eventually someday that's going to be my goal. Like I would love to have a few $1 million in property, and then instead of just selling that at a lump sum and taking that tax burden, I would just say, hey, I'll seller finance this to you, whether it would have a balloon on it, which would just mean, hey, in 10 years you have to pay this off. I might do that. I may not do that. I may just have it go into a trust for my kids too, you know, after I pass. So I think trying to avoid taxes is my main concern.
That's most people's.
You know, and like anybody who's savvy with that type of stuff, it makes sense to them. Like, why would I pay that tax burden up front when I can collect a monthly check and not have to pay that?
No, absolutely. And then, so that seller finance, I think, and there's also, you know, one thing I've seen people utilize too, is it doesn't have to be the full note. You know, like you said, hybrids with Subto, which we'll dive into in a second, but you can also get a portion seller finance just to help with bank financing. Yeah. You know, which I think is one thing that's common now that people are not taking advantage of. You need obviously then to have, you know, the track record and credit profile to go to a bank and get high levered funding like that. Right. But if you can, that's another option that works great, is maybe you only seller finance half. Right. And then the other half, you know, you go to the bank for. And now you're financing a much smaller amount and becomes more manageable and preserving cash.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a good point.
But I think with the seller finance piece, I think often gets put together with Subto. You know, private money, hard money, those get mixed together. Seller finance, Subto is, I think, obviously used in congruency with each other, but Subto is much different.
It is. Yeah. So Subto is basically somebody with an existing mortgage with Wells Fargo, whoever it is. And I'm saying to you, hey, I'm going to take over the payments on that house. And typically with that, you can get a lot better terms because they have a note with the bank and they want that dollar amount. So let's just say they owe $250,000 and they want $500,000 for their house, but the market's only telling them they're going to get $400,000, $450,000, whatever that is, right? So you can go to them and say, hey, I will take over your existing mortgage, and you can do a wrap on that as well, which I can dive into after this. But typical Subto would just be taking over that existing mortgage, and then a hybrid would be taking over that mortgage and then adding on an equity portion to where they'd be the bank on that second position.
Now, in that case, a lot of times people ask me, can you assume a loan? Which, when we think of a loan assumption, we think of fully taking over the mortgage, doing a credit check, and actually go through the underwriting process, which is different.
Yeah, it is.
So how does Subto differ from that side? Like, I know you mentioned, all right, I have a loan with Wells Fargo. You come in and you say, I'll take over your payments. Yep. But what changes for me?
So that mortgage stays in place. A lot of people will say their typical objection is, well, what if the note is called? So there's this thing called due on sale clause. So every time you sign a mortgage, there is verbiage in there that says, if you sell this mortgage, we reserve the right to call the note or accelerate the note so that it's due when you transfer deed.
Due in full.
Due in full. Yeah. So there's tons of ways around it. They actually have insurance now, due on sale insurance. So you can get due on sale insurance, which is typically like 1% of your purchase price. So it can be expensive, but that is one route if you want to ensure that you won't have to pay for that in full. So basically that insurance would say, hey, if they call the note, we will make sure that we will restructure the deal so that you won't have to pay off the note. And if we can't, they will actually pay off the note themselves. So they're pretty confident that they can get that done.
I feel like that's everyone's biggest question. If you Google Subto and you take a few looks, it's always due on sale comes right up with it. And I think everyone has a challenge of how do I, one, convince a seller that we're going to be okay. Right. And then two, how do I make sure that happens? And I think there's always a void sometimes in that process.
Yeah. So that's definitely something that you could utilize, and you could put the seller's mind at ease with that insurance. Also, a lot of times, like the banks will initiate that due on sale. But if you call the bank and you're like, hey, listen, like I'm taking over the payments here, and tell them who you are and what you do, and let them know that they're in good hands, basically. A lot of times they'll work with you and say, okay, like, we're not going to accelerate this. Just let us know who like the third party servicer is that's making the payments here. So typically with Subto, you would use like a third party to make the payments for you on your behalf. So you would pay that third party. They make the mortgage payment. They notify the seller and you that the payment was made. So kind of everybody's assured there that the payments are getting made.
Because it's by a third party and there's no question as far as who does it.
Right. So a lot of times, like, you can get around the due on sale with that, just explaining to the bank, like, hey, like, we're going to use this third party servicer. Here's my track record. Here's the proof that we're going to make payments, and they'll work with you. And
so are people from the seller's perspective, what would be some of the most common objections you hear? Because I know, one of the more common objections I hear is, well, how am I protected? If you stop paying, it's on my debt.
Right.
So what are so obviously third-party servicer gives them some assurance, but what other types of objections do you hear, and how do you kind of overcome that?
Yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest one. A lot of people would say, what if you don't pay? Like I said earlier, there's a performance deed that we usually put in every single Subto deal, which basically states that if we miss 30 days of payments here, you're going to get notified that we didn't make the payment, and you have the option to take the deed back in that instance.
So you put that on the Subto as well?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, we don't do a performance deed on everyone, but if the seller is kind of weary on that, we do mention it to him as an option that we can do that.
Sure.
So we're not in the business to like do deals that we can't pay for. So it's never actually happened to us, but I like to assure the seller that we're in the business to make money here, not lose money. Right. So,
and the backing of a business, right?
Yeah.
It's versus, if you're renting to someone, it's one person. You're like, hey, look, we have more than just myself, behind me. We have our team.
Right.
We've done this before. We're going to make sure we make money and you make money. So
right.
we're going to make your payments.
Yeah.
But for you, then the benefit obviously is, one, you could potentially take over a mortgage at a really low rate.
Yes.
And then the second is potentially no money down. How
right.
are you typically seeing deposits structured in a scenario where maybe you're assuming the full thing and there's no further value exchange? How are you managing cash out of pocket?
Yeah, typically those deals we can get for like 0% down because they're in a situation where they can't sell it on the market. They're almost desperate at that point. Either they're keeping the house, and a lot of times they get like a job transfer across the country where they already left, or they're like moving and their house isn't selling, so they're in a tough spot. So a lot of times, like, we come in as like the savior, like, hey, listen, your house isn't selling. You're not getting that number. You owe more than it's worth. Maybe we're willing to give you that number if you can give us terms, which would be like, no money down. Let us just take over your payments and you can exit the deal. So.
And the deed obviously transfers to you and you guys, and that becomes your property.
Yep. The mortgage stays in place and the deed would be transferred. So a lot of people get title and deed confused too. So like, deed is actually who owns the property and title is how you own it. So like Tony Eisenhower is on the deed as the owner, and title would be like tenancies in common or joint tenancy. So that's basically how you own the property. So deed is actually ownership of the house.
And how does that come into play more so in the seller find that Subto space? Is there certain things people should watch out for as they convey title?
As far as
if you're, so say you're taking over a property.
Yep.
If the bank is not aware that maybe this transaction is happening, how do you, make sure that everyone's protected in the transaction?
Yeah. As far as like a due on sale, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say definitely that performance deed. Having that performance deed, having either insurance for due on sale. Yeah, those are the big ones, really. There's also other ways around it, like using executory contracts. So you could transfer the deed back into the seller's name and do like a contract for deed, which basically, it gets kind of deep in the weeds here, but basically everybody signs everything, right? So I would still have deed in hand. It just doesn't get recorded with the county at that point. So you're holding deed, you're just not recording it, so that bank is not notified that like the deed was transferred, because technically it's not transferred until it's recorded, right? So if you don't record and you're still holding it, it's a contract for deed, they call it.
Very interesting. Yeah. I know there's more too you could go into.
Yeah, and depends on the state too. There's different laws and regulations, but that's a good way of getting around it too, just not recording it and holding deed.
Now, I know when a lot of people think of these types of projects or opportunities, they think of long-term. But there's opportunities for short-term, flip type projects too. Are you seeing any of that? And
definitely,
has that been something you've looked at?
Yeah. So I have 3 flips going right now. 2 of them are actually sub-2. And the benefit for the seller on both of those, I'll give an example. The one I just closed on yesterday is in Plainfield, Connecticut. It's actually my old boss that I used to work for, 10 years ago. And him and his family, they've been there for 14 years and they're ready to make a change. They want to move down south, but they're not ready to move for a few years. So they wanted to sell the house and rent for the next 2 years. But they were in a rush. Like, they're like, if we put this on the market, we're going to have to fix it up. We're going to have to pay realtors. We're going to have to do that whole thing. And I'm like, well, listen, even if somebody is going to pay cash for this, right? They have to run title. Typically, it's going to take 30 days. If we do a sub-2 deal, I can run title in like 3 or 4 days. I can have cash in your bank account in like less than a week. So for him, that was his biggest pain point, was like, hey, like, we need to make this quick. You know what I mean? Because they wanted to move. So it worked out good for them in that sense, to where I was able to give them a bunch of money up front because he had a ton of equity, and we closed sub-2 on it. So he'll get paid, that mortgage will get paid off after I flip it. So in 30 days, 60 days after we do the flip and put it on the market, that original loan that we took over is going to be paid off, and he already got his money on the front end.
That's a great solution for a challenge like that.
Yeah.
And is the other one a similar scenario where seller needed a quick closing and that's where you found the opportunity?
Yeah. So he needed to go to Puerto Rico, this guy in Worcester. And again, like, he didn't have the money to fix up the property or hire realtors or go through that whole thing. So that was a pre-foreclosure, actually. So basically he was going to lose the house in 60 days if he didn't make the payments on that. So we came in and paid his arrears and paid all his back taxes and all that stuff up front, and then just assumed his mortgage that was left. And he made about $30,000 on that deal and was able to just walk away from hand us keys and not have to do a thing. So,
and for you, minimal cash out of pocket compared to if you bought it.
Yeah. So if you think about it, if I paid cash or used private money, like we talked about earlier, I'd have to pay 12% or 15%, whatever it is, on $250,000. So all I had to pay up front was money for that $30,000 to him, and his arrears, which were like another $30,000, I think, and then maybe $60,000 for the rehab. So a total of like $150,000 I borrowed instead of $350,000. So that holding cost I saved big time.
Right. And in the sub, so you still had a portion that was held sub-2.
Yeah.
And that was probably at a much lower rate than if you borrowed that cost anywhere else.
It's like 4%, I think. So
wish they made more of that.
Right? I know.
I would love another push. They're like 6 months of just, here's some cheap money.
Yeah. You know what's funny too, though, is like people complain about the interest rates, but at the same time, with the lower interest rates, the competition was there, right? Like you were getting outbid every 3 seconds when the interest rates were low. Now it's like way less people are bidding on these houses. You're actually getting deals. You're getting money off on houses now. Right,
which is funny because every investor I talk to says there's deals right now. But I feel like the general consensus is people are like, oh, nothing pencils. But I think I was talking earlier, and I think you got to look for the type of deal you want in the right area.
Right.
And with the right seller, because it takes the right mix of location, situation, and strategy, exit to make a deal make sense. So I think sometimes people don't look for the opportunities either in the right places or, look in general. And you might not see it if it's right in front of you. So.
Right. Well, I mean, like, creative finance is just another tool to have in your tool belt, right? Like me being able to do sub-2s or seller finance, novations, wraps, all that stuff is just another tool that I have above the average investor, right? Like the average investor is looking at it with cash. Like, hey, this doesn't pencil out, but it pencils out for me for creative because I have a different tool in my tool belt.
You probably have more opportunities because everyone else misses them.
Exactly.
So that's a great thing for people to think about. But if I was someone listening to this and I'm like, this sounds great. I want to go do a sub-2 tomorrow.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for someone who's trying to get into the community, into the space? Are there resources? How do you learn more? Where would you point someone to if they're trying to figure out how to get involved themselves?
So I joined, I don't even think I mentioned this yet, I joined Subto, which is Pace Morby's community mastermind group, whatever you want to call it, which has been like life-changing for me. This was like the start of me learning how to do fix and flips correctly, how to wholesale if you want to wholesale, how to learn about creative finance. Creative finance is literally just like one aspect of joining this community. I mean, every single day, there's daily Zooms, daily dials, they're called. So basically you can log in the morning And you can do a practice call with somebody who is well vetted, who will critique your phone call for you, so that they're like role playing on the phone, and they're like, hey, next time you talk to this person, don't say this, or don't say this, use this word instead. So they're literally like critiquing you on how to talk to sellers, how to talk to agents and stuff like that, which is like infinite return on that.
Yeah, finding people in that case who have done it, been there before.
Right.
And is there a cost to join a group like that?
Yeah. So it's a community. It's a one-time fee. I think it's like $9,000 now, or just under $10,000.
That gets you in for life.
For life. And Pace is always adding new stuff to the course. So like anytime he adds new courses or new groups, there's no extra fees. Like you're always in on that price. And like I said, daily dials is every day, always. So like whatever day of the week it is, you can log in, do a Zoom, do a role play in the morning, and go about your day. There's also underwriting Zoom. So like if you have a deal and you don't know how to underwrite it, or you think you're trying to figure out if it's a good deal, you can bring that deal every single day to that Zoom, and they'll underwrite it for you and break it down and say,
coach you through, hey,
yeah,
what about this strategy?
Right.
Talk to them about that. That's great.
Yeah. So just that alone is worth the money, you know?
Oh, absolutely. Resource.
Yeah. So I did a deal in Oxford in April of this year, and it was my first time calling pre-foreclosure list. So basically there's this software called PropStream. There's a few different other ones, but you can pay for that service. I think it's $100 a month. And basically what it is you can pull lists of like pre-foreclosures, foreclosures, expired listings, tax delinquencies. So this is where you're going to find like your off-market deals. And I learned all of this through Subto. And long story short, I pulled a pre-foreclosure list, my first time ever making cold calls. And my first phone call that I ever made, it was to this woman in Oxford, the town I live in. And I was talking to her for like a half hour. I built some rapport with her, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? Her husband had 2 strokes, and they were going through like a really tough situation. And I was kind of her ear to lean on at that point. So I talked to her for a few days, built some rapport. Actually, it was in January, I think December or January of last year. So it was like wintertime. I went over and plowed her driveway, like did all this stuff for her. And really, I wasn't even trying to buy the deal at that point. I felt bad for her. I was trying to help her out, you know? And she was getting phone calls all the time from wholesalers, from fix and flippers like myself, just saying, hey, I'll buy your house cash. And the thing is like a lot of these people don't want cash. Like she was in a really bad situation, but she also wanted somebody to listen to her and really figure out what her pain points were. I went in there and I told her, hey, listen, like I will pay for your moving costs. I'll pay for storage for all of your stuff. I'll pay for first and last and where you're going to go. And solving those problems for her was way more important than someone just saying, hey, I'll give you $300,000, because she didn't know what to do. She was in a tough situation. I think there was some drugs involved with her and her husband, which is unfortunate. But she just wasn't in the mental capacity. She was just going to let the house go to foreclosure. So she wasn't in the mental capacity to deal with any of that stuff. So me coming in and solving those problems for her, just the movers and storage and stuff like that, was pivotal in her journey. So I think that's the only reason I got that deal. And that was just a fix and flip. But we made $165,000 on that deal, which was the most I've ever made on a flip, which they don't ever pencil out that good.
Yeah.
But
sounds like a home run too. And
Yeah.
your first call, nonetheless.
My first call.
This is going to be great.
Yeah, exactly, which never happens. So if you guys are going to call this, don't expect to get a deal your first one, because it never happens like
It's
that.
a numbers game, right?
It is. Yeah.
I've heard that a lot from like the wholesaling community, and was at an event recently. That's what they talked about was, the guest speakers were some of the bigger wholesalers in the Rhode Island area, and they were talking about just exactly that. Like, you're solving someone's problem, and at the end of the day, like those types of deals, everyone can win.
Yeah.
You help them move on with their life. You've solved sometimes problems to them that seem insurmountable. They're like, the world's falling. What am I going to do? And sometimes some form of check, their problem solved, and usually it happens pretty quickly. So.
Yeah. We were able to come in and take care of that for her and get her out of that situation. Not only did we pay for her movers and all that stuff, we put $90,000 in her pocket. So guys, keep in mind, like, this lady and her family were in a really tough situation. They were in another 30 days, they were going to be on the street. Like, she had a auction date set for her house, the whole nine. So like, that for me was so mind opening. And not only was I able to help this family, help this woman, but I also made $165,000 doing it. Like this, I was like, I want to do
it's good charity work.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I was like, I want to do all of these deals, you know? So that's kind of where my mind's been, is working on pre-foreclosures, and having that creative finance tool in my belt is just another advantage I have. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
So I love hearing these, success stories. I mean, especially with Subto and creating. I know this was a cash deal, but Subto, creative finance, and flips, really pre-foreclosure. Like those are all like the mythical words in real estate investing.
Yeah.
When you hear, when you're first starting out, here's someone, I bought a pre-foreclosure deal and I helped this lady pay off their tax liens. You're like, you're a wizard, because those are the terms you don't hear and you hear talked about. So
right.
Is that your focus going forward, is finding more opportunities in the pre-foreclosure space, or what's your focus for now and kind of throughout the rest of the year?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely want to focus on pre-foreclosures. Like I said, that was so eye-opening for me, that deal I did in Oxford. And I think passion and purpose is so important in life, right? Like for me to help that family and still make money and have a business from it was just so eye-opening to me. So that's like really what I want to focus on, especially for the fix and flips, potentially helping somebody out of a shitty situation, and then helping them transition into wherever they're going next and make money doing that. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think on-market deals are hard to get right now for fix and flips. They're hard to pencil out, especially with, like we talked about earlier, just traditional interest rates and stuff like that. They're getting harder and harder to find. And there's a lot of competition on market. Like if you find a distressed property on the MLS, it's, as you know, I'm sure it's gone in a day or two, So
it's like birds go into that, smelly dumpster.
Yeah,
they find it,
There's like 100 people bidding on that thing. So finding them off market, you do have competition, but calling those lists, you definitely have less competition. And then if you can really hone in your skills to not necessarily go in there trying to buy somebody's property, and instead try to help them and figure out their pain points and what they need, you will succeed in pre-foreclosures or off-market deals.
And do you think that avenue is difficult for someone who has like a W-2? Because I know a lot of people that I work with, as far as on the loan side of things, financing the residential stuff, that they have W-2s. Right. So I think it's really important, as people think about how do I get into real estate investing, to not only look at the opportunities in the sense of what are the benefits? You can get in for low money down, you can make some great opportunities, pencil that you might not otherwise be able to.
Right.
But then you have to look at the time component, which I think sometimes people miss when they're looking at investing or starting investing. I think we were talking earlier, the shiny object syndrome, right?
Yeah.
Which is a hard thing to overcome. But do you think it's geared towards a certain person, or do you think everyone should have some Subto creative finance tool in their tool belt?
Yeah, I think everybody should. I think, I'm not saying you have to pay the money to be in Pacemore community, although I do recommend it. But there's a ton of resources out there on YouTube University, I call it. I learned so much on there myself before I even signed up for Pace's group. I'm actually a part of a few masterminds, and I would say they are pivotal in my success for sure, because just being around the right people, being able to see what other people are doing that are where you want to be, and being able to talk to them or even just be in the same room as them is so huge, for anybody in whatever avenue you're chasing. I think that's so important.
Yeah, those mastermind resources, I'm in a few masterminds too, and always looking for more, because you try to level up, right?
Right.
As you move, you want to be in part of groups that ideally I'm the dumbest person in the room.
Exactly.
So I think that's, I've heard so many people tell success stories where that's a fundamental point.
Yeah. And to piggyback on what you were just saying, like if you're the smartest person in the room, you need to find new rooms, right? I love that
Exactly.
quote.
I love that quote.
Yeah.
And especially because I think as you get into masterminds too, the egos check, everyone checks at the door.
Right.
Like we're here all for the same reason. We're all playing in the same sandbox. Like let's win together.
Yep.
And that's where it's, especially if you're the smallest person in the room, it's like, that gives you that much more motivation to listen rather than talk, which that's when you learn.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like I said, when I signed up for Subto, I thought I was just going to learn creative finance. Little did I know I was going to, make $160,000 on a pre-foreclosure list. I had no idea. So you never know what you're going to get into with just being in the room with successful people and people who are chasing their dreams, Yeah.
This has been an awesome conversation. And I know I wanted to ask you more about your resources, because I know we talked about a few things, but if you could recap and give 3 of the top resources you've used that have helps you grow your business, whether it's specific to Subto creative finance or not. It could be podcasts, books, community groups. What would you say those 3 resources are? And tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, I would say like I got started with podcasts. They're free. Most of them are free. Bigger Pockets, Get Creative with Pace Morby. That's his podcast. All these things like a Bigger Pockets Rookie, that was a big one for me. They're literally people just like you and I who are getting started, and along their journey, they'll be talking about how they got started and what they did. And it's so motivational to hear like how people, like regular people like us who had just regular jobs or whatever, got into real estate and how they did it. So I think podcasts are huge. I think going to like real estate meetups or whatever community meetups are local to you is huge. I've met a ton of private money lenders, a ton of just networking events are amazing. And then I would say masterminds. Like, pay the money. It's worth it. I cannot stress that enough.
I think the last 2 you mentioned really hit home with me.
Yeah.
For the masterminds and the community groups. You go to local networking groups. I've met so many, great people, including you, through these groups. So you meet so many good people. And I think the real estate community really bonds and gels.
Definitely.
Much closer than people might think on the outside.
Yeah.
And it's nice when you get weaved in it because there's a lot of good people. And it's not just all business. You meet some great people along the way. And at the same time, can meet some good people for business too. So
definitely
serves both purposes. But
for sure.
Yeah. Well, I've had a great time with you today, Tony. I'm glad you came on. And if people want to learn more about you, where can they find you online? Yeah.
So Tony Toaster on Instagram. I kept the name. It was a high school name that stuck. So I figured I'd keep the name just because everyone remembers it.
That's OG. Yeah.
So Tony Toaster _ on Instagram, Tony Eisenhower on Facebook and YouTube. And I'm definitely going to start posting a lot more content of my flips and everything that I'm doing.
Look forward to it.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks for having me.